ProCognita, Get Agile podcast.
Mob Programming. Interview with Woody Zuill.
Hi and welcome to the Get Agile podcast. Today with me is Woody Zuill, is Agile guide, but first of all, well known for the mob programming. Welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. I really I appreciate you asking me to come in.
So let's start from the very beginning. What is the mob programming for people who never heard about this one, if there are any?
Oh, sure. So mob programming is basically a way of programming where the entire team is sitting together. And I use this simple phrase, we're going to gather all the brilliant minds to work together on the same thing at the same time, in the same space, and at the same computer. So we are all actually working at one computer, conceptually at least, and with 4 or 5 people contributing, and one person at the keyboard basically transcribing or channeling that information into the computer as we write our code, and pretty much do any work that we do as a team.
All right, so we got the whole team working on the one problem, solving one problem, and that may raise some reaction from the management, especially the management that is focused on the utilization of the resources. How do you deal with this one?
Well, I don't know how to deal with that exactly. It's like if a manager believes that we need to have everybody working separately, I'm not sure I'm the person who can convince them otherwise. But I've prepared the talks that I give to at least give some sort of reasoning behind why this might work. So managers will say things like, I want to have 5 things getting done rather than one thing. Or I don't want to pay 5 people to do the work of one person. Now managers, please don't take offense at this, but that doesn't make any sense. You know, that would like to be saying, I'm going to hold a wedding and I want to have a band, but I don't want to pay 5 people to do the work of one. So I'm going to pay the bass player to come in for an hour. And then I'm going to have, that next hour, we're going to have the guitar player. And the next hour, we're going to have the drummer. You know, do we split that up? No, we want them all there at the same time. If we want live music, we want the band there. Unless we're getting a solo performer, but that's what we need to understand. If we want a dance band, we need to have those musicians all there at the same time. It's not 3 or 4 or 5 people doing the work of one. It's 5 people doing the work of 5 people. And we get things done. This is the whole point, I should say. We can get things done more directly, from start to finish, very directly, when we work this way. When we separate people, we incur a very high cost of collaboration and communication. And so we think that we can communicate well when we separate people, but we hardly can communicate well no matter what. So this is, I've got lots of reasons why I think that we should allow a team to work this way. What we found for ourselves was we actually got more work done, but it wasn't just more work. It was the more meaningful work. Because there was less chance of us doing something that, doing some work that wasn't going to add value. We were getting a higher quality and our work was better done. It had a better finish to it. We also found that it was less stressful, that people were working under less pressure when we worked together because we're sharing the load. So another example would be if you ask your friends to come over and help you move, and there's a refrigerator that's way too big for one person to move, and a couch that's way too heavy for one person to move, and maybe some other big appliances and so on, you wouldn't go in and say, Tim, you move the couch, Bob, you move the refrigerator, I'm going to go ahead and move the freezer or whatever it is. No, we're all going to go together. We lift up the couch, we carry it out and put it in the truck as a team. It's not that we have more bodies, it's that we have the right bodies to do each job. Boy, I hope that's helpful.
So basically what we do, we take the pair programming from the extreme programming and we put it into the extreme by making the whole team. So I know that you're doing this for a while. So do you have a data, like a specific data, not just anecdotal data that is making the teams go faster, go more efficient, or but do you have any evidence that I can share with the management?
So I would say almost all the evidence has to be anecdotal to do what I would consider anything like reasonable research would take years, and it would take people to devise a bunch of control groups. And it's puzzling to me, how are we going to really measure between these two ways of working? But I think I would like to say it this way. Where is the research that shows that separating people and having them work individually is an effective way to work? And yet that's what everybody does. I've asked for where's that research. They just do it because that's what they do. So, but I want to add another thing. Even if we got exactly the same amount of work done working this way, I would prefer to work as a team, because we were also getting higher quality. We were also getting a better product for our users, and we were getting things done more directly. So even if we worked at the same speed, so if we took 5 people, they worked separately, we try to bring their work together. Imagine the merging problems that we often have. Oh, I thought you meant this, and oh, that doesn't work with this. Those are the problems that we have when we work separately. Even if we could, if the amount of work we got done in a period of time was exactly the same as 5 people working separately, I think 5 people working as a group is well worth considering, because we get the benefit of having 5 minds on each problem. Instead of having 5 problems with one person thinking about each problem, we have 5 minds on each problem. We found that work that used to take a week or 2 to get done was now getting done in 2 or 3 hours. It's a much more direct way to work. So if we added up the work at the end of the week, we found we were getting more done, but it was also more meaningful, more useful stuff of higher quality. I think it's a win all the way around.
So again, it's not how fast we type; it's how fast we solve the problem, right? So and
yeah, and it's not just speed. It's not how fast we solve the problem, but how well we solve the problem. And I'm going to add a much bigger benefit. How much work we don't do is really critical. If you remember, this is from the Agile Manifesto's principles, maximizing the amount of work that is not done. And that really means maximizing the amount of work or eliminating a lot of the work that we don't actually need to do. I think that's a huge benefit.
Yeah, I'm usually saying that it's not about doing twice as much as doing as twice as as little, right? So half of what you think you should do, rather than everything you want to do twice as fast. So we get those teams working together, and you say why management thinks about that working separately is going will let us go fast. And basically my belief is like this idea of the resource utilization coming from the 19th century, and we somehow show with the lean approach that it's not about it's not about utilization, it's about the flow. So the mob programming sounds for me like addressing this flow and challenge, right? Like delivering fast, small number of items instead of having the whole team busy. By the way, talking about the mob, how come you come with this name for this
So well,
approach?
when I first before we were doing what we called mob programming. So first of all, let me just make it clear: mob was meant as a joke, and this is how that joke came to be. I was doing code dojos at user groups and small conferences. So the people, I would reach out to everybody in my area and say, hey, I've got this fun thing we can do at your user group where we just all sit together and work on something. And it's fun to do. I really enjoyed doing it. And so people say, yeah, let's go do that. And I did probably 100 or more of these coding dojos before we ever were doing mob programming. But we were using a very specific sort of coding dojo. And what I had found was that when we get 5 or 6 or 10 people at one computer, it can be chaotic. It can be chaos. And so somewhere back about, and this would have been 2009 or so, but somewhere back in 2001 or 2, at one of the extreme programming conferences, somebody provided a talk and a paper that they called mob programming. And it was about bringing everybody together to work. So I liked that idea, but I also liked the word mob. So the very first time I did this at a user group, I said, first, let's demonstrate pair programming. And I'd bring somebody down and I'd pair with them for a little while. So you can see how the flow of this works, but I want to add more people. So let's add another person. And then we had 3 people. We still have to use some kind of protocol to make it where it doesn't become chaotic, but it's kind of easy. But then I would say, now I wanted to open it up to everybody. So instead of pair programming, it's going to be a mob of people. A mob is a group of people. And that group of people is gathered together to take action that they would never take on their own. A good example of a mob, the way that we're talking about it here, and this is how I meant it. A good example of this would be in an old Western movie where the gunslinger has come to town and he's causing all kinds of problems. So the town folk get together so that they can somehow defend themselves against this person. That can be thought of as a mob. And so or you might think historically in the let's say in France, where they want to get rid of the king. Everybody takes to the street with their pitchforks and their torches, because they don't even have weapons. But with the power of more people, they can make a difference.
Yeah, but
so that was just meant as a joke.
Yeah, that may be a little scary for the management. Anyway, assuming that as a team we have a mandate to try, what would you recommend for my team to how to start?
Well, almost like anything new that we're going to learn and want to do, we need to practice to get good at it. So one thing I recommend is that we would want to practice it. And matter of fact, I think it's really important to learn a little bit about it, read a little bit about it. I do have a book, by the way, that I wrote where I tried to take the things that I teach in my workshop and put it into a book. I also have a couple little websites where I've written some of these things down. But the basic idea is really simple. We need to learn how to work well together. And if we're going to work well together, then we need to have a protocol or some way, I would say not rules, but guidelines on how we'll interact. So the first thing I suggest is that we practice it as a group on simple exercises, not on real work. Because real work brings the pressure of needing to get it done and feeling there's just more to be concerned with. Whereas working on an exercise, who cares? When we're done, we throw it away. We follow one, what I would almost consider a rule, one stricter guideline. For an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. When we follow this guideline, we get a less chaotic environment. And this is when I was doing the coding dojos, as I was explaining about the name, we kind of just invented these guidelines as we did it. Each time something would come up and it looked like we need some guideline to keep us from having chaos, we would add it to our guidelines. And one of them, the first one, is actually that idea, which I learned from Llewellyn Falco, who's a quite brilliant programmer, but also an Agile coach and an Agile expert. Really brilliant person. If you haven't had him speaking at your conference, you probably should. He's quite good. Anyways, that is a protocol. We will use this to keep it from becoming chaotic. Another rule we used in the strict coding dojo was that we should only have one person talking at a time. So this means we have to let the other person finish their thought, not just finish their sentence. Because thoughts often can take more than one sentence. Just as I'm talking with you now, I'm using several sentences to convey an idea. But a lot of people are just waiting till the person finishes their current sentence to say, oh, I think we need to do this, or something like that. So another thing is, let each other express their ideas, and then let's try them. So let's say I had an idea about how to solve this particular problem. We're going to make a map. We're talking about, in a computer language, we're going to make this map. We're going to iterate through this, and then we're going to do that. So I would express that at a very high level, and then we would give it a try. But if somebody thinks they have a better idea, all I ask is that you wait for this idea to be finished, and then we introduce the other idea. You might say, I've got another way to do it too. Let's try your way first. Now, someone might say, well, let's hear your idea and then we'll decide between the two. That's okay. But if we only decide to do one or the other before we try them, we get half the learning. So if somebody wants to try this, some of those guidelines I just gave you, work on a simple exercise, let each person share their ideas. Now, we used a rotation, and we would normally have, when we're doing the coding dojo, one person at the keyboard, that's all you can get to a keyboard, and one person guiding them. And so at first I kind of suggest you try that so it's a little bit easier. But once you get good at it, people can contribute at any time. I gave you a whole workshop in just 5 minutes there. But it's a simple enough thing to do, but it's also, it's got its nuances and finer points. I do workshops on this, but I'm not suggesting you need to have me do a workshop for you. Think about in your own life. If you want to do something, you can take some lessons, you can watch some YouTube, you can take a workshop, and you can just try things. Now, when I was young, I wanted to learn to juggle, and I didn't know anybody who juggled. I was probably 10 years old. And there was no YouTube in those days, believe it or not. I could see people on television juggling or wherever. And so I just got some what I would consider easy to juggle items, like some soft rubber balls or something. And then I just took one and I put it in one hand and I practiced throwing it in the air and catching it in the same hand. And then I practiced throwing it from one hand to the other and back again. One ball, just one. Then I added the second one. Can I throw this ball, then throw that one? And just catching the first ball was tough enough. But eventually I could get it where I could throw one ball and then throw the other and catch them both. Little tiny steps, and I didn't go to a workshop. I didn't need to get taught. I didn't read a book on it. I just knew people could juggle, and I slowly figured that out. We can do this the same way. It's really simple. Get a few people together, choose a simple application or a simple exercise like from online, like maybe Exorcism.io website has lots of exercises. There's one called Code Wars, I think. There's Emily Bach's website called, it's Coding Dojo. You can find these little exercises, pick a couple interesting ones and do them as a team. Learn to let each other speak, get good at sharing your ideas, and get good at listening. These are the skills we need to have.
Okay, we got a few good points here. So I'm gonna sum it up. First of all, what you said is like when you're learning a new skill and more programming as a new skill, you need to have a time for learning this one, right? So assuming that you start doing the more programming, going to be awesome from the day one. That's not gonna work most likely. This is what I'm hearing. Second, you mentioned a book. You mentioned some website. You also has like a few videos on the YouTube with the more programming.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
we're going to share the links later on under the video, so people can read them out. But also you mentioned the workshop, and one of the things I did like a half a year ago when we were completely locked down at home was joining the workshop, and you were showing how to do the more programming online. So can we get a little bit into those workshops? So who is organizing them? How people can join those workshops? How they can learn more programming the same way?
Well, first of all, I haven't done a lot of public workshops online. I am doing them internally within companies. I do have several scheduled. One is coming up in just a few days, so I don't know if this will be broadcast by then. December 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, I think. It's just in a week or so from now. I've also got somebody scheduling one for me in March. I haven't been putting this kind of stuff on my website because I've been just a little too busy to be doing that, and I could, but people could just contact me through LinkedIn or Twitter and ask me, what do you got coming up? I am hoping to start getting a little better organized with listing these things, but what I've noticed is once I start publishing these things, then I have to keep doing it, and that just adds to my workload. So I'm trying to just keep up with everything. So the one group is they're doing it. It's out of Italy, but you can do it from anywhere in the world. I also had the free little sessions I was doing. You joined in one of those free sessions, I think, and those were just for the fun of it. They were to help me learn better how to reach out to people online, doing these workshops and using the tools. We used the Cyber Dojo tool, which more than one person can use. Is that what you used when we were doing that?
That may be a case. That was half a year ago, so.
Yeah. So the Cyber Dojo tool is just an online development environment that can work in many different languages. It's really pretty straightforward to use. You need to follow a few little guidelines to use it for more than one person, but it gives a very responsive interface. And, we would just pick something to work on and away we would go. It's pretty straightforward. And I don't announce those ahead of time. I would usually announce those in Twitter. Like tomorrow morning I'm going to do this, or later today I'm going to do it. And it usually would get 10 or 15 people, sometimes as few as 5 or 6. And I've done it with 40 or 50 people. That's almost unbelievable. But using Zoom, I can do breakout rooms and put people into separate rooms as groups, and it works really quite well.
Yes, and
so that's not... go ahead.
No, I was saying that there are more and more coaches, organizing those workshops as well all over the world. So you don't need to stay awake till the midnight of your time if you're in Europe or Asia in this case.
Well, it's a funny thing. I used to say this, and I still do occasionally, is like I would like to have it where people are doing this sort of team programming or mob programming, and they don't have to know that I exist. At one time, I was the only one saying, hey, look at this. This is working well for us. Do you want to try it? And just talking about it at conferences. I would love it if everybody just knew about it and was, there's no certification. If somebody's saying you can become a certified mob programmer, I'll tell you right now, everyone in the world officially is already a certified mob programmer. I'm blanketing the world with this certification. You already have it. That just means I'm going to try to work well with other people. And if you can do that, you don't need any training or certification to learn to get better at that. I really believe this. We didn't know anything about mob programming when we started doing it. It was an accident that we started doing it, actually. And so once we did it one day, we were looking at a hard problem for one of our teammates, and we asked them, they brought it to us as a group. We sat in a room and looked at it, and we said, well, instead of just talking about it, let's just start working on it. And we started refactoring the code as a team. After an hour or two, we had made some great success and moved forward with some great things, and we're getting quite high quality. And then somebody came into the room. We had scheduled a meeting room, and somebody came in and said, you have to leave because we have a meeting in this room right now. So, at the end of our meeting, we could have just gone back to our cubicles, but somebody said, let's just keep working this way. Let's find another meeting room. And we immediately found another meeting room. In our little scheduling at the company I was at, we had maybe 50 meeting rooms or 40 meeting rooms. We found an empty one. We went there, and we just kept working this way. So we stumbled upon the idea, but we had been practicing doing coding dojos for almost 6 months before we ever stumbled upon the idea that this is the way that we could be working. And it actually, it was an accident. We stumbled on it. It was a discovery. We uncovered something.
All right, so let me try to dig more into the, how to get more, how to get better into more programming. So assuming that the team started doing this, they did some dojo, they get some proficiency. Are there any recommendation for them, or are there something they should avoid? Is like what are the guidelines for those people to get better at this one?
If I've understood you correctly, we want to kind of talk about what are the things to watch out for that could be a problem.
Yes,
Is
yes.
that what you think?
Any problems, or like something to focus on, something to avoid, like a good practices and the bad practices of the ball programming.
So I don't believe too much in best practices. I always believe whatever we're doing, there's a better practice, and it won't be the same from team to team. So, but one thing I really watch out for is somebody typing away at the keyboard, but nobody gave them direction on what we're going to put in. Now, we don't direct somebody a keystroke by keystroke. We're directing them at a much higher level of thinking. That's the big advantage here is we're all keeping our mind at this problem and solution space, and we're just giving the little instructions to somebody at the computer, like we're going to add a drop down and we're going to fill it with all the regions out of the database. Well, some developers could just sit down and do that without any further direction. And so that's the level of navigation that we can give them. But if they are not as versed or as capable in the programming language, we can give them more details. So that's sort of a guideline we follow. Start at a very high level, take it to the whiteboard. I've got a whiteboard next to me. You can't see it, but take it to the whiteboard, diagram it a little bit, if that helps us stay on track, and then off we go. Now, I would make the warning, though, that if that person is typing without having that direction, and we're all watching, we're code reviewing as we go, we're paying attention to the design, we're paying attention to are we accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish? If that person is getting off track, everybody's there to say, well, that's not exactly what we meant. But this is one of the things about communication. So a warning is communication is way more difficult than we usually think it is. We want to believe that once we've said something, the other person's understood it. But by rapidly taking it to actually coding or doing whatever the work is, taking to that quickly, we will learn whether we understood, whether we were understood or not. This rapid round tripping, the big benefit of that is we find out where we were wrong in our communication. So first thing we can, as a guideline, if somebody's just typing and nobody's giving them direction, we got to stop that. That's just people watching someone else code. The other side is if somebody knows the big problem and has a big solution, and it's pretty big, it's going to take several sessions to do, then we got to be careful about having just that one person guiding everything. We can break it up and allow others to guide parts of it. So if somebody's doing all the navigation for days at a time, or even all day long, navigation means guiding the person at the keyboard in solving the problem that we're trying to solve and the solution we're trying to write. The other thing is, somebody's typing all. Those are two things to watch for. Another thing is if we are getting frustrated, we need to notice that and say, wait a second, I notice I'm getting frustrated. One thing that I used to do with a couple of my teammates, we would watch out for each other. And if we notice somebody becoming tense or somebody becoming frustrated, we would try to figure out how can we help with that. Because sometimes we don't notice for ourselves that we're getting frustrated, but somebody else can be more in tune with it. I had one teammate who would, every day, I'd ask him, could you pay attention? Do I do something that's not good for the team? And then he would ask, at the end of the day, he would come to me, and he had written down a few things. He said, you were getting a little bit loud at this time. It looked like you were getting annoyed, and that's not a good thing. And so this worked out pretty well, is to have a buddy or another person who can help you reflect on your day and think about, what could you improve this next day? I hope that was helpful.
Yes, and so you mentioned also that there are different types of problems. So are there any types of problem you would say that's not a good idea to use the more programming, or not the best idea to use the more programming in this case?
So I hear that question often, and
You're welcome.
And yes, well, at first we thought this was for the really difficult problems, but because we had started out on a really difficult problem and we made really good progress with it. But then when we would get something, a simpler problem or boring work, like, somebody has to go in and clean up some corruption that occurred in a database, which means, there's 5 or 6 steps. You get a copy of yesterday's database, that was saved off. You do a diff to find out what changed. You determine which are the ones that are part of the corruption, and you go in and manually delete records and create new records, this kind of thing. That's just boring to do with a whole group. That's boring to do alone. But should we be paying programmers to do boring work? Probably not. I don't think that's a good use of our time. So this is what we noticed. If enough of those kinds of boring things came along, we should, as a team, look at it and discuss, could we automate this process?
Love that
If
answer.
we could automate the process, then we probably should, rather than doing it over and over as a manual thing. Now, when I first learned to program, 1982, I believe, or 83, I got my first computer, and the software was so terrible that it wouldn't do what I wanted it to do, and I thought maybe I have to write my own software, but I didn't know how to do that. So I thought, well, now I got to learn to program just to use this. Well, I thought I'd give it a try. I had a brother who was programming, actually 2 brothers, and I asked them, do you think I could learn to do this? And they said, yeah, give it a try. So I did. Here's the thing. At first, to get more time to program, because I only had a few hours a day, I would automate things that I was already doing that was taking up my time. So back in 82, I would back up all my files at the end of every day. And this was for work that I was doing, not software development, work we were using the computers for. That was a manual process. So what I did is I wrote an application that would go through my file structure. This is an old CPM machine, not DOS or Windows. It would go through the file structure, find anything where the date time change had happened on a file, and save it off. So I could automate a process that was taking me 10 or 15 minutes a day. With about 2 hours of programming, I would never ever have to do that again. Now, nowadays we have things like Git repositories and all sorts of ways to do this automatically, but we didn't in those days. So this is sort of the point, I guess, is that
I really like that.
overall, well, you understand what I'm saying, I hope.
Yeah, I really like this answer. I mean, I've seen teams, fighting with the recurring bugs. It's like, that's worked for me as an answer for this question.
So, and I would say, no matter what, when we work with other people, the knowledge gets spread around. When we work alone, the knowledge does not get spread around. The first thing I noticed when we started doing this at user groups was people would frequently say, wait, what did you just do there? What was your key combination to get that to happen? And it's like, I know some shortcuts, you know some shortcuts, they overlap, but also, we have some that don't overlap. When I see you do one and I go, hey, how do I do that? All of a sudden I double my number of shortcuts until I know all the useful ones to myself in any particular application. That's just one tiny example of spreading knowledge around.
And
I've had it where, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was saying, and the technology, and also the programming to the people who never programmed before. So that's
true.
Great way of transferring the knowledge.
Yeah, so there's a bonus to this. It's like, let's just say I'm the database expert. I don't know anything about programming front end. I've done both, but just saying as an example. So when I watch somebody actually programming the front end, I can think more about how can I make it easier for them to do their job, which I don't learn to do when I'm doing my work separate. So if somebody comes to me with a requirement that would say we need 2 new tables, stored procedure, and whatever, a couple keys, and it needs to be indexed like this, as a database expert, you would go through and determine what's the proper way to do all that. I learn better how to serve you. And as I do my work, and I'm guiding others in doing my work. So if the front end person does something that as the database person, I go, you know what? It might be good to store this in the database, and we can easily do that. So the next step would be to turn that into something instead of hard coding some values. So we get this fuller, better solution than we would get if we were solving it alone. So that kind of knowledge sharing helps me and my own expertise without really learning too much about your expertise. But I also am learning about how does front-end development work? How does middleware work? How does testing work? Because we would love to always have a tester on the team. But please ask your next question.
Yeah, awesome. So the last question for us, as a ProCognita, we're having a 10 years anniversary this year. So I'm always asking the question: what the change you have seen over the last decade, and in this case especially, how do you see the pair programming, which is we already discovered that is over 10 years by now. How does it change over the last 10 years?
You mean in general, or you talk? What are you? You're asking about software development in general, or mob programming?
I'm more interested in this case in the mob programming. So how does it evolve from your perspective?
So when we first started doing it, we had already developed our protocols or our guidelines on how we would interact with each other, but we still had a lot to learn. So over the years, basically my protocols or my guidelines have sort of developed a little bit. So at first we would work with the idea that anybody can contribute at any time. We found that sometimes that's too much. So we had to learn how to do just enough. I like to say it this way: we should each of us be prepared with our own specialty, with our own expertise. We should be prepared at any moment to contribute the right thing. So that means we want to contribute the right thing at the right time, and we need to learn how to do it in the right way, which means we need to learn how to explain ourselves. We need to learn how to do it with respect. We need to learn how to do it without insisting that ours is the best way. My father used to say, he was an engineer. My father was an engineer in the phone company. And he would design switching stations and solve problems like that. And he would say there's 1,000 right ways to do anything. So we should never think that ours is the one right way. This is like an important thing. So over time, I've just gotten my understanding of how we can work well together a little bit more refined. But I'm seeing people doing mob programming in many different ways. We used, for example, one of our techniques was to use a timer. And whenever the timer goes off, let's say it's set to 5 minutes, whoever's at the keyboard leaves the keyboard and another person sits down. But there's other teams who don't use a timer. They will switch the person at the keyboard whenever somebody says, I'd like to type for a while. Or somebody who's at the keyboard says, I don't want to type anymore. And so they're not using a timer. Another group I worked with, they don't use a timer either. They switch at the end of every chunk of work. So somebody might be at the keyboard for 5 to 10, 15, 20 minutes. And then when they're done with this part, they move away and somebody else takes the seat. I just want to make it clear so we understand. If you have the knowledge that needs to get into the computer, that's probably your time to step away from the computer. But that doesn't mean that has to be always. That's one of the things I started with. But there are times when you could be sitting at the computer and be the one with the knowledge. There's no strict rule. I would like to make sure that we understand that. But what I have seen is many, many more people doing it. And therefore, we're going to get many different ways of doing it. I would warn you just to be cautious about too many rules.
Yeah, so we keep finger crossed for making more teams doing the mob programming. All right, yes. Thank you very much for this conversation, and I really enjoyed this one. I really enjoy your idea about how to get better into this one and how to solve even the boring problems using the whole team knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I had a wonderful time.
To learn more, visit procognita.com/getagile.